Hello and welcome to my pitch about dyslexia and semiotics. CIM402.2 by Candice Gwither. Out of all the critical concepts that we learned about this trimester, I found semiotics to be the most interesting. As a creative within the creative industries, we can use different critical concepts to enhance our work, deepen its meaning, or play with the perceived representations. As a visual artist and an audio engineer, I rely on play with semiotics in my work whether I'm aware of it or not. My pitch is about creating a single artwork that centers around what a dyslexic may experience based on my own journey and struggle with dyslexia. Throughout this course, I recognize that there is a connection between the two, and put simply, dyslexia can interfere with the translation of semiotics, particularly in visual learning and oral language. Before we dive into the concept and how I would want to represent it, we first need to discuss dyslexia and semiotics. So what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a hereditary neurobiological disorder. There are weakened network connections in the brain between the different lobes that are responsible for speech, language processing, reading, and recall. And this short video explains it better than I can.
When we're young, we're activating both hemispheres of our brains heavily, expending energy to learn how to read. But for fluent readers, the brain streamlines more activation to structures in the left hemisphere, like this region known as the visual word form area, which helps us recognize letters and words. And this region, key to mapping letters to sounds, called phonological awareness. For example, breaking up the word cat into the sounds ka, a, and ta. And there's Broca's area, which among other things helps with comprehension to understand what words actually mean. Activated areas link together with white matter. There are neural pathways that turn into a complicated highway network that allows fluent readers to process a word within milliseconds. But in the dyslexic brain, these highways and activated areas can look a lot different. Research using brain scans of dyslexic readers showed that there was less activation in these areas of the left hemisphere, suggesting there's often a pathway disruption in these systems that help map sounds to letters and decode words. But people with dyslexia also consistently showed overactivation in the brain's right hemisphere when reading.
And that makes it more laborious.
This could mean that while dyslexic people may have trouble recognizing words and sounds, they're working even harder to compensate elsewhere.
Often with dyslexia, neural pathways are not disrupted, but just slowed down.
There are 5 main types of dyslexia: phonological, rapid naming, double deficit, surface, and visual. Phonological dyslexia affects someone's phonemic awareness, which is their ability to break down words into individual sounds. People with this type of dyslexia can often process and understand whole words, but not the individual sounds that make them up. They have trouble decoding and sounding out words. Rapid naming. If someone has trouble naming letters, colours, and numbers quickly, they might have a rapid naming deficit dyslexia. This type of dyslexia involves difficulties with both reading pace and language processing. Double deficit. People with double deficit dyslexia have issues in the 2 main areas of reading, which is rapid naming and phonological awareness. Surface dyslexia. People with surface dyslexia often have trouble recognizing familiar words on the page, just like that then, and matching words to their sounds. This makes it hard for them to memorize and remember words, even ones they have already learned. Visual dyslexia is likely caused by issues in the part of the brain involving visual processing. People with visual dyslexia often have a hard time remembering what they have just read. They also may have issues with spelling, forming letters, and other aspects of writing. Semiotics. It is the study of signs, and it is the recognition that signs and objects can have multiple meanings depending on the situation. For example, the colour red can have many meanings. In nature, red signifies danger and warning, yet the colour can also represent love, passion, anger, and danger. In a traffic light, the colour red can be used to signify the need to stop. Although the light doesn't explicitly say stop, through semiotics and what we have learnt, we understand the meaning behind the light of the traffic light. Semiotics is made up of 3 main aspects: a sign, a signifier, and a signified. The sign is a successful, understandable form of communication. The signifier is any motion, gesture, sound, pattern, or event that conveys meaning and communicates. And thirdly, the signified is the concept that the signifier refers to and meaning that it conveys. As we had seen in the video before, there are some disconnects and weaker processes between the different parts of the brain that are used to decode language, written language in particular. Because of this, the dyslexic brain struggles to recode and reproduce and understand what the meaning of the signs that we read. It could be a letter, it could be a word, or it could be a symbol. Although semiotics can go a lot deeper than this, it can go into colour psychology, double meanings, but for this aspect, we're just going to focus on the dyslexic and the semiotic relationship. This dual root cascade model is the model for reading comprehension by Coulthard in 2001. This visually displays the path that print text takes to speech. It shows the semiotic process that our brain uses to decode, print, and recode as speech. So how does dyslexia affect me? As mentioned at the start of the presentation, I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 7. The school I attended picked it up when I was in Year 1 and I was formally assessed in Year 2. My father also has it, but not as bad as mine and not officially diagnosed. I struggle with all the 5 types of dyslexia: phonological, rapid naming, double deficit, surface, and visual. I found it quite hard in the past to describe how it looks and feels to read. Until I started researching for this presentation, I came across this image. This is a visual representation of what a visual dyslexic sees when they look at text. Pretty confusing. This blurred effect is due to visual stress. It's the overstimulation of the system of the visual nervous, the magnocellular timing system, which is responsible for rapid signaling and movements when a visual event occurs. Over the week, as I've been thinking about this assessment, I've been jotting down when I've recognised I've had a dyslexic stumble. This collage is a representation of my day-to-day struggle with dyslexia. Here we can see the phonological dyslexia at play. They're getting the B's and P's wrong, hearing the sounds wrong. I wrote ABJ instead of APA because it sounds similar. Right and right, getting them mixed up. Totally missing letters in words like Foley. I just went FOLY instead of FOLEY. And this little short video explains the mirroring process that happens in my brain where I make these mistakes.
To explain further, this rotation and mirroring and switching the letters are all 3D movements. So if we take a regular cup of coffee and switch and rotate and mirror it, it will always be a cup of coffee. But look what happens when we do this with a typeface or with a letter. The meaning will change.
So the pitch for the creative work that I propose to make is not exactly playing with semiotics, but it is using it to represent what a dyslexic sees. Using this image as inspiration, I propose to use 3 pieces of acrylic. Each layer will represent a different type of dyslexia. So the first layer will be the original text with no mistakes. The second layer would be the phonological dyslexia layer. The phonologic spelling, mix-up of letters, and dropping of connecting words. The next layer would be the visual dyslexic, the misinterpretation of visual signs. The slight rotation on this layer will give that blurred effect when they're all laid on top of each other. This is what all 3 layers would look like from the front. But as you walk around, you'll be able to see all the 3 layers start to split and see the different types. See the phonologic dyslexia type with the spelling mistakes and the grammar mistakes. The visual type where it's slightly off kilter to when you blend them all together to mess up the visuals. And then the original text, and you'll be able to see through everything, translucency, and recognize and actually see the decoding issues. And that's all I'm trying to do with this piece, is represent the decoding and the recoding in a dyslexic's mind is very different and at times struggles a lot more compared to a non-dyslexic mind. There is actually quite a bit of research around colour filtering and the effects it can have on dyslexia, particularly around green filters and blue filters. Using these filters can help reduce the visual stress, but there is a little bit of contention about if it works or not, or if it's a placebo effect. But looking at this image on the screen, we can quite clearly see that there is a difference in the visual stress that it gives you. There is also a typeface being created by the guy who did the video before on the mirroring. He created a typeface that can't be mirrored, and that therefore helps a dyslexic read. And I, exploring this a little bit more through this process, have actually found that it does work, and it does stop that mirroring that happens in my head without me even realizing it. But to use, I don't know if I would ever use this typeface. For me, it's very aesthetically looks quite childish and quite young. And I'm quite self-conscious about my dyslexia and how it affects me in my work, and just in my speech and my written work. And I would feel even more self-conscious about having this on my computer and someone coming and using it, or even printing stuff off in it. But for those with a more severe type of dyslexia, I can see that this would be a massive benefit. Mine is relatively mild, but I'm sure as through this video you've been able to pick up on my reading and my little stumbles. Did the best I could to edit it out. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and thought a little bit more deeply about semiotics and the effect on it of dyslexia. Thank you.